Over months of intense negotiations, the $15 billion trade deal between Canada and the United States was shaping up to be the key to strengthening an even closer economic relationship between the two countries. In an atmosphere marked by global uncertainty and the competitiveness of international markets, the pact promised to boost strategic sectors, modernize infrastructures, and create thousands of jobs. The discussions, which had initially generated optimism in business and political circles, turned into a stage of veiled tensions where every word and gesture was scrutinized in detail. The Trump administration, which had fervently defended the need to solidify an unbreakable alliance with Canada, saw this deal as the perfect opportunity to reaffirm its vision of a strong and self-sufficient North American economy. However, as negotiations progressed, irreconcilable differences between Washington's priorities and those of Ottawa became evident. While the U.S. president emphasized the importance of seamless collaboration to counter emerging economic threats from other global players, Canadian leaders began to question whether an excessive dependence on the U.S. was truly benefiting their country. The announcement of the decision to abandon the deal came as an unexpected blow, leaving Trump and his advisors in a state of perplexity. In subsequent statements, White House officials expressed their astonishment, interpreting the measure as an act of direct defiance. For the Trump administration, this abandonment not only meant the loss of a strategic tool, but also symbolized a betrayal of the trust placed in the bilateral relationship. Media headlines exploded with the news, highlighting Trump's devastating reaction and speculating about the possible repercussions for U.S. foreign policy. Within the political sphere, the Canadian snub ignited a heated debate about the viability of maintaining traditional alliances in an increasingly multipolar world. Experts in international trade and foreign policy began to closely analyze the underlying causes of this decision. Some argued that after years of negotiations that seemed to exclusively favor U.S. interests, Canada had decided it was time to diversify its commercial relationships, exploring new horizons that offered greater guarantees of stability and growth. Others pointed to the growing influence of the European Union as a determining factor, since the region offered trade agreements with standards and benefits that appeared more aligned with Ottawa's long-term vision. Meanwhile, in Washington, an atmosphere of crisis and strategic reassessment was taking shape. Canada's rejection became a symbol of the fragility of traditional alliances in times of global uncertainty. Emergency meetings in the Oval Office followed one after the other in a desperate attempt to understand the motives behind the surprising decision. During these sessions, strategies were debated to regain the lost trust, and alternatives were evaluated to compensate for the void left by the absence of the pact. The official narrative focused on emphasizing the importance of learning from this setback and adjusting trade policy to adapt to an ever-changing international environment. On the other hand, in the media sphere, the story became the center of a voracious discussion about the direction that U.S. economic policy should take. Analysts were quick to suggest that Canada's abandonment of the deal could be interpreted as a strong message of disapproval toward Trump's management, indicating that Washington's unilateral vision was no longer enough to sustain such weighty alliances. There was talk of a new order in international relations, in which diversification and the pursuit of more equitable agreements would emerge as the fundamental pillars of foreign policy. In an atmosphere marked by global political and economic uncertainty, Canada embarked on an unprecedented change of course. For months, high-ranking officials and foreign trade advisors gathered to carefully analyze the future of the country's trade relationships in a scenario where exclusive dependence on the United States was beginning to show its risks. Canadian experts unanimously agreed that diversification was the only way to guarantee stability and growth. In confidential meetings and roundtable discussions, political leaders debated the merits of redirecting the trade strategy towards the European Union, a region that offered more equitable agreements and development prospects in strategic sectors such as technology and energy. "We cannot afford to concentrate our interests in just one economy," stated an economic advisor, emphasizing the need to open new horizons and reduce vulnerabilities. Internal analysis revealed that, unlike the deal proposed by the United States, Trade pacts with the EU not only involved an influx of investments and infrastructure modernization, but were also based on more advanced regulations and long-term benefits. The quality and stability of these agreements ignited hopes for a profound transformation in Canadian trade policy. During exclusive interviews, several officials highlighted that this decision was driven by a forward-looking vision to position Canada as an independent global player, capable of negotiating from a diversified base of interests. The commitment to embrace EU markets was also interpreted as a strong political message, in which the country decided not to succumb to pressure from its neighbor, but rather sought to build alliances based on balance and reciprocity. As the reorientation process deepened, various business sectors and academic communities joined the debate, offering innovative perspectives on the advantages of strengthening ties with the European Union. Chambers of commerce and research centers stressed that by diversifying its markets, Canada would not only mitigate risks associated with fluctuations in the United States economy, but also gain access to advanced technologies and modern trade practices unique to the European bloc. This emerging consensus was key to driving structural reforms that are now evident in new legislative projects and bilateral cooperation strategies. Finally, the decision to reorient Canadian trade policy not only marked a break with the past but also paved the way for the implementation of strategies aimed at achieving sustained and resilient growth. Canadian leaders envisioned a future in which the country stands as a bridge between America and Europe, facilitating the exchange of knowledge and resources. This change, laden with ambition and realism, promises to transform the economic landscape and reaffirm Canada's position in an ever-evolving global arena. The shift in course adopted by Canada has unleashed a series of international repercussions that are reshaping the landscape of global trade. The decision to step away from the bilateral agreement with the United States in favor of greater integration with the European Union not only represents a blow to traditional economic hegemony, but also signals the emergence of a multipolar order. In this context, the relationship between the United States and Canada has become more complex, forcing Washington to rethink its trade strategies and seek new allies capable of countering this reorientation. The uncertainty generated by this shift has had an immediate impact on financial markets, where investors and analysts have expressed their concern over the possibility of increased fragmentation in international trade policies. As other countries observe these events, a global debate is opening up regarding the viability of maintaining historical alliances in a constantly changing world. EU member states have welcomed Canada's decision, viewing it as an opportunity to strengthen their ties and expand their commercial networks. Simultaneously, nations in Asia and Latin America are re-evaluating their own strategies, considering the possibility of further diversifying their agreements in an environment where the traditional economic dominance of the United States appears to be yielding ground to new global players. This transformation not only poses immediate challenges such as market volatility and uncertainty in trade negotiations, but also paves the way for the creation of new strategic alliances based on shared interests and values. In the medium and long term, it is expected that this realignment in trade relations will drive innovations in the way international treaties are negotiated and established. The lesson drawn from the Canadian experience is that diversification and the pursuit of equity are fundamental to ensuring sustainable economic stability in a multipolar world. Future negotiations will likely be characterized by a greater focus on reciprocity and the inclusion of regulatory standards that benefit all parties involved. Thus, Canada's decision positions itself as a catalyst for change, urging the international community to rethink traditional models of cooperation and to forge a future in which interdependence and collaboration are the cornerstones of global trade.
The reaction in Washington was not limited to the legislative sphere. The business sector also mobilized to assess the impact this decision might have on their operations. Large corporations and small business owners expressed concern over the possibility that instability in trade relations could affect supply chains and investment flows. In business forums and meetings, the need to diversify not only markets but also strategic partners was discussed, envisioning scenarios where risk would be more evenly distributed among various regions. Meanwhile, academics and economic analysts seized the opportunity to debate the future of international trade. In seminars and specialized publications, it was highlighted that the Canadian episode could mark the beginning of a new era in U.S. trade policy, one in which flexibility and adaptability become essential virtues. Many argued that the challenge of rethinking traditional dependency would force the United States to adopt a more collaborative and less unilateral stance, which could, in the medium term, foster greater global integration. Within the political spectrum, voices emerged that saw this crisis as an opportunity to reshape the image of the current administration. Some opposition party leaders seized the moment to criticize what they considered a lack of long-term vision, while others suggested that the situation demanded a radical rethinking of foreign policy strategies. In this climate of uncertainty, public pressure translated into calls for greater transparency in negotiations and the implementation of policies that promote stability through diversified alliances. Finally, the situation prompted the United States to review its international coordination mechanisms, leading to proposals to strengthen multilateral organizations that can jointly manage fluctuations in global trade. The Canadian experience was interpreted as a signal that the world order is in transition, and that traditional models based on unilateral hegemony are giving way to a scenario in which collaboration and diversification are key to facing the challenges of the 21st century. Thus, the crisis transformed into a catalyst for debate and potential reforms that could ultimately redefine the future of international trade relations. The situation also led to a rethinking of the administration's communication strategy, forcing it to craft messages that would reassure both the markets and the public. In public statements, high-ranking officials attempted to minimize the negative impact, emphasizing that this was a natural transition in an increasingly interconnected world. However, the need to restore confidence became evident, and press conferences and dialogue sessions were organized to stress the United States' intention to adapt to the new global dynamics without abandoning its core principles. Similarly, the financial sector reacted cautiously to the uncertainties presented, adopting a wait-and-see stance as possible medium and long-term scenarios were evaluated. Stock markets experienced fluctuating movements, reflecting both fears of increased fragmentation in international trade and the anticipation of new investment opportunities. In this context, financial analysts began designing strategies to mitigate risks, proposing to diversify portfolios and increase monitoring of global trends, which underscored the interconnection between trade policy and market stability. Finally, internal debate and pressure from various social actors spurred legislators to convene special committees to study in depth the effects of the trade reorientation. This exercise in analysis and self-criticism was seen as an opportunity to redefine economic priorities and strengthen the regulatory framework. With a commitment to avoid future unilateral dependencies, reforms aimed at fostering competitiveness, innovation, and multilateral cooperation were advanced, marking the beginning of a new phase in which resilience and adaptability become the fundamental pillars for sustainable growth in an ever-changing global environment.